Okay, everyone, why don't we give it a start? Let's do a pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. If we could have a moment of silence for those suffering in the Ukraine. Thank you. Thanks. Apparently we're going to be having a moment of silence for that for a while. Okay, so that was the call to order. We did a pledge. Let's see who's here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I just did roll. Everyone is here. We have Drew online.
Hi, everyone.
Okay, and we have a city administrator. What do you know? Okay. There's a community segment first, and this is going to be Renz, and she's going to go through the county's housing needs assessment, which was a committee that she sat through. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, City Council, City Administrator, for allowing me to be a part of the steering committee for the Dutchess County Housing Needs Assessment. The committee met 4 times, and I provided the consultants with some Beacon-specific information. There was a lot of it, but some of it was our build-outs. The Highlands Current series on affordable housing, written by Jeff Sims, the affordable housing solutions from the mayor and the city planner, and a number of housing stakeholder contacts who understand the landscape of housing and the households in our community, and they could help the consultants understand the Beacon-specific story in this county-wide analysis. I also provided them with the Patterns for Progress community profile on Beacon, which was the data that I reviewed before moving my family here. So it was a great experience serving on the steering committee with the other housing stakeholders who were private developers, nonprofit developers, officials from other localities, and Saylor and Heather Lavarnway from the county planning office, and they really managed the process very well. I worked in affordable and supportive housing for many years, so this committee was right up my alley. So slide 2. CZB, that's the name of the consulting firm. They've provided similar assessments all around the country, Muncie, Indiana, Poughkeepsie, Troy, Des Moines, and their work is available at czb.org. Their goals for us were to, as you see here, understand the existing patterns in Dutchess County housing, anticipate the future needs, and make recommendations to inform policy on both county and municipal levels. Slide 3. Thanks, Ben. It was tricky for them to provide a report in the middle of a pandemic, but the assessment does acknowledge the COVID impacts on housing while examining established patterns that existed pre-pandemic and will continue in the future. Slide 4. So I want to leave plenty of time for questions, so I'll just present some of the brief takeaways from CZB's market analysis and what they recommended to the county. Slide 5. So growth has been slowing. Household sizes continue to shrink. We'll give you a minute to take in that slide. It's pretty straightforward. Slide 6. An important part of the story here, not dissimilar from the rest of the country, is the aging population. Since 2000, all cohorts over 45 years old have grown, and you can see the others pretty much have shrunk. This is similar to the country, but Dutchess County is aging more rapidly than the U.S. as a whole. In 2000, you can see we were closer to the median age, but now we're 4 years older. Slide 7. And this is really the crux of the story this research tells us. Incomes have lagged behind housing costs, and this is certainly typical of trends countrywide. The National Low Income Housing Coalition reports that nowhere in America, in no county, can a person earning minimum wage afford the average cost of a 2-bedroom rental. So you can see here that median home values have risen close to 90%. Owner incomes have increased only under 60%. Rents have risen more than 70%. This is from 2000 to 2019. But renter income has risen under 40%. Now, the inflation rate is also affecting renters, as you see here. So you see that line, that red line across, and you see the last pink bar coming so far below it. Their incomes fall way below the rate of inflation. So in addition to the lack of affordable housing, those households are impacted by the cost of transportation, food, everything. Slide 8, please. Oh, and I should have said, you can stop me if you have questions at any time, but since I'm giving an overview, it might be better to wait until the end. But did you have a question, Dan?
I just had more of a question about this slide and what the definition of cost burdened is. Does that just mean that housing cost is more than 30% of income?
That's exactly right. Yeah. And that, when I use the term cost burdened for renters or owners, it's the same. 30% of their income is spent on their housing. More than 30% of their income is spent on housing. So slide 8. Are we on the right slide? Just checking in. Yeah. In 2000, for renters, so you're looking at 3 bars here. The far left one is 2000, the far right one is 2019. And if you look at that middle section there, that's in a box, in a blue box, in 2000, renters with incomes between $35,000 and $50,000, 10% were cost burdened, meaning they spent more than 30% of their income on rent. But in 2019, 71% of those are cost burdened. And so that is where the consultants have focused their solutions, because that is where you really see the greatest need. And it's not shown here, but the full report breaks down affordability even further.
Right, you've got quintiles of income, right? So the lowest quintile is on the left, and then the second one, and then the middle one, which is the one you have squared, and then the higher on the 2 on the right.
Yeah.
And the reason you're saying they're picking the middle one is because the lower income ones have housing solutions and were already cost burdened, right? And the big change is in that middle section. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think so.
Yep.
So the affordability is broken out in the main report a little bit more. And if you review that report, which I definitely encourage you to do and ask questions once you have, because this overview doesn't cover everything. It shows us that in 2000, a renter in Dutchess County could afford to spend about $780 in rent, and the typical rent was $707. But by 2019, that breathing room vanished, as the income average for renters was $1,066, lagging behind the average rent of $1,220. So in slide 9, that's where you really see the quintiles broken out in terms of the widening gap. You can see that those earning in the highest quintile, so that 95th percent, they have almost $4,000 to spend on anything they need. That's what they have left over. They could spend more of it on housing or whatever. But down the line, that excess shrinks a lot. And those income gains at the top of the scale, so 60, 80, 95, that means that those households are competing over the scant housing resources that exist. And so they're setting the terms for the prices all the way down in the market. Because does that make sense? There's a scarcity, so they're driving up the cost of rental units all the way down.
I'm sorry, Ren, can you repeat that one more time?
So the higher quintiles have more to spend on housing, and there's a scarcity of it, of rental housing. So they're grabbing it up and they're bidding up the market overall, all the way down the line. So slide 10, wait, did I skip a slide? Oh, I'm sorry, slide 9 is the gap analysis, and this shows where the consultants come up with the number I'm about to give you. So it's a little bit out of order, but it shows the number of units that are needed that are not available, affordable units that are needed for each of those income brackets. And in slide, so it's the deficit of units available for certain income levels. And this is how, adding these up is how CZB arrived at their recommendations. So slide 12. In slide 12 is where their recommendation is for the county to establish clear goals to address the greatest need, which is rental households earning under $50,000. And they recommend slide 13 that 2,155 interventions, that the county take to 2,155 interventions. And I'll explain interventions in a minute. But that number is the difference between the number of households earning less than $50,000 and the number of rental units affordable to those households.
A clarifying question, so they're recommending 2,155 interventions for renters earning less than $50,000?
Yep.
So us building more luxury apartments does not address that 2,100. I mean, it does indirectly, but it
Not directly.
But that's not the number they're talking about.
Not directly, but I'm glad you brought that up because it is an important point. If we had a requirement or a set aside for that luxury development, then that would fit into one of their recommendations.
So whatever percentage of units within that development could count towards this.
Absolutely.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah.
So may I ask a question about that number?
Sure.
So if we go back to slide 10 and we look at the 3 income categories where we see this is just for renters, right? Okay, so on the renters, if we look at the below 50,000, we're just aggregating the bottom 3 sections, and that's how we got the 21 number?
Yes.
Okay.
I didn't double check their math, but I believe it is just those little diagonal lines. You add up those little squares under 50,000.
Okay. All right, thanks.
So it would be those 3 bars, it looks like, is the deficit of units. So slide 13, slide 14. They emphasize, remembering, and I have to keep reminding myself, it's not all about Beacon, right? This is the county-wide analysis. So they emphasize in slide 14, are we there yet? A fair share approach. So give me a minute to explain what this means. So basically this means that the distribution is fair across the county. And to define fair share, they use these 3 criteria. Distribution of total renter households, households making under 50,000 and the distribution of jobs. So when you look at, we're not at the next slide yet, but when you look at the next slide, understand that what they're recommending for each area per year is based on that weighted scale of 3 criteria. Okay, so slide, next one, 15, I think. So of the 2,155 interventions, and I think I failed to say that's over 20 years. So for the whole county, we're talking about 108 interventions per year over time. And in the blue column, those are the number of interventions per year per jurisdiction. So Beacon, that number of interventions over time is 105 or 5 per year. The types of interventions they're talking about, slide 16, create a Dutchess County Housing Trust Fund to pay for the interventions and fund it at $2 million per year. Slide 16, develop a toolkit including a lot of different things. So they've included a lot here because our municipalities differ so much in need. Parts of Dutchess County are rural, as you know. So some of these I'm going to list off apply to us, and some are not as good of a fit. But overall, they're suggesting that Dutchess County have in their toolkit local site ID and land use updates for new construction. They're recommending rehabilitation programs for existing rentals, local inclusionary zoning policies that encourage affordable housing for that income level, subordinate mortgages to promote homeownership, tax exemption policies, subsidies for including affordable units in mixed income developments, Molly, like we were talking about earlier, and more housing vouchers. So overall, I'm really glad the county took this assessment on, and I look forward to working with them to address affordable housing beyond the catch-up number. They would emphasize if they were here that 2,155 is not, that's the catch-up number. Certainly going beyond that would be good. And that's it for the overview. Any questions?
Can you talk a little bit more, especially because this meeting had county people in it, and this is a county-wide plan, what their thoughts were about next steps that they're thinking about with this, in addition to individual municipalities talking about it like we are?
I think they are going to, go forward with the Housing Trust Fund. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's been announced in the paper, right? So, yeah, one of the things that I think the county is doing is trying to do that set aside. Another concept which we would encourage would be something akin to the Greenway Compact that was set up more than 25 years ago, which had the goal of trying to get a Greenway trail in every community from New York City all the way up north. And if you joined the Greenway Compact, you agreed to do certain things, and you got grants to do planning and other things. And I would encourage the county to want to take on a program like that. One of the things that I heard in the review is a lot of the towns, so if you look at the lists of interventions, where the majority of the interventions have occurred are in the 2 cities, right? The study from Patterns for Progress says that 61% of subsidized rental units are in the city of Poughkeepsie, and another 21% are in Beacon. That's more than 80%, and we are collectively under 15% of the population. Okay, so that fair share concept is trying to get other communities to pick up what they haven't done for years. And I think if you looked at comparisons like our inclusionary zoning, I'm not sure how many communities in Dutchess County have inclusionary zoning. And I believe the ones that do have buyouts, which we don't have. Meaning that, oh yeah, that 10% set aside, I can buy my way out of that. And so as a result, there hasn't been many interventions in the towns, although from the data that I saw, Ren, the towns have as much of an affordability problem as the cities do. It is a county-wide problem now. And so that encouragement would be a good thing. And the compact would help us because I think we've already done a lot of the types of recommendations in their toolkit. And I think what we would look for is funding to do projects. The other thing that I understand, and Ren helped me out on this, is that in the county there's issues with respect to capacity, meaning the towns don't always have water and sewer and can handle large projects. Our water and sewer have capacity, so that's kind of the other thing is I would really like that funding not to be going to capacity, but rather actual programs. So those are some of the things I'd be interested in kind of coaxing the county in that direction.
Yeah, and for those who look at the report, you'll see, they drill down a lot on the submarkets within each area specifically. And so in Beacon, we have a surplus for those households who earn 50 to 99, and a deficit in every other income group, even in the high ones. A lot of deficit because we're saturated. But in terms of the rental submarket, Beacon looks a lot like Red Hook or Rhinebeck, and a lot better off than our neighbors directly north in Poughkeepsie and Fishkill and Wappingers. So, and the same goes for cost burden renters. So that addresses some of what, Mayor, you're mentioning in terms of infrastructure. And it's the same for home ownership. We have very little surplus and below the county average for cost burdened homeowners. So the consultants making this recommendation is they're zeroing in on the greatest need. It doesn't mean that there isn't need in every area, just like we're seeing across the country.
Ren, was the issue of Airbnb and the impact on the housing market, was that ever brought up?
I brought it up a couple of times, and it did not make its way into the report. I think it might be because there, again, are such different needs that it isn't such a county applicable need. But the mayor and I both discussed this with the housing office, and I brought it up initially after my conversation with you, George. So when I provided, the first thing that I did with the consultants was I provided them an overview after interviewing each of the city council members. And every word you said to me, I said to them.
Good.
And I thought that we would see among the toolkit, I thought we would see accessible dwelling units as, part of what they recommend. But I think that just makes it makes a bit of an impact, but not, the scale that they're looking to achieve.
I'm also curious about our short-term rental enforcement. I recognize that what you're saying is that that's a small part of this study, but I do note that Cold Spring or Phillipstown is considering hiring a consultant to help with the oversight of their short-term rental law, and I know that enforcement is a concern of ours, and I am curious where that lands in our overall priorities.
One other thing I've just remembered, Paloma, is that the consultants have worked countrywide. So they've worked with other states, other regions, different size cities. And when I did bring this up with them, they said you would be amazed how often the overall affordable debate ends up being swallowed up in these side conversations about short-term rentals or ADUs. So, I think we should talk about it for sure and look at solutions. But I think that the fact that, people need housing that they can afford is really the story here that the housing needs assessment is addressing.
I'm curious, I don't necessarily think we should definitely do this, and I appreciate it would add capacity for the city, maybe our building department in particular, but like see, if we take these criteria as a given and ones we want to adopt in a way, if we can then start to keep track of how we are tracking against these, so how many of these units are we adding through inclusionary or through direct building that we do. For example, I know we have a number of buildings that are coming online, so it's possible we're going to meet our 5 even this year. Not to say that 5 should be the only ones we're going for, but I would kind of like to know that, to know what we're already doing and then what we want to leverage further.
Yeah, just the Edgewater parcel,
Yeah.
which will start up next year, is 240 units, of which 24 will be affordable.
But
Right, so that's,
is it the same definition of affordable as we have here? Under 50,000 a year?
that's a good question. I'm
I
not
just
Yeah, I
sure.
had a
remember,
similar
what's our
question.
percent AMI on the 10% requirement? Do you know?
I'm not sure which program we're using there. I'd have to figure that out. Right, is that the 60%? Again, we'll have to look it up, right?
Great. Yeah, that
Unless
could
someone
be
knows offhand.
Yeah, just a next step as we think about this is like a thing that we're maybe comparing ourselves to and where we currently are in that.
That's a
Right.
great idea, and I think because they've defined it so clearly here, just between the council and mayor just now, we already start to dig into the differing definitions of affordable housing, and just for everyone listening, those definitions vary based on the funding stream. And we might decide to go to, and I say we, but I don't mean me, I mean a developer on a project might decide to go to 90% AMI, or they might decide to go to 70% AMI, and the difference in that 20% difference can be all the difference for their funders, or for their lenders, or for their profit, of course.
And can you say what AMI is for those?
Area median income. So that at least is a number that, is stable. But, and the report goes into, a lot more detail on the, the sectors of employment within each area, more into ownership issues. So as you dig into it, please reach out if there's any other great ideas like that, Molly, to track our progress in addressing housing need for cost-burdened renters earning under $50,000 a year.
Yeah, the one thing, Ren, when we were getting an early look at this together, my recollection was there was an interesting pattern at the upper end, and I think you kind of referenced this, which was that there's a shortage of higher-end housing in terms of people in Beacon or who want to be in Beacon who can afford kind of more housing, and they end up bidding up the price for that middle income section.
That's right.
Right, and
Yeah.
that was sort of interesting. I mean, that was a surprising statement. It made sense when it was explained, right?
Yeah, it really is interesting to look at how the different rental submarkets compare across the county. And this is, where I said that we look a lot more like Red Hook and Rhinebeck. So I don't have this slide to show the public unless, Ben, you were able to pull up 26 on the full report, page 26 on the full report. But, I can just sort of read it off right now. We have a deficit in housing that is affordable to rent for incomes less than $20,000, between $35,000 and $50,000, but then a surplus for those earning $50,000 to $75,000, and then a deficit for those earning $75,000 plus. So you have people coming whose household income is over $75,000 competing with people whose incomes are $50,000 and below, and they're driving up the prices of rentals for that income and everyone below them. and the supply is less.
Yeah,
Ren, was this the slide that you wanted?
No.
What page did you say?
I think it's 2 down from that, Ben. Yeah,
Oh,
keep going to
thank
the
you.
next one after that, the one you're on now. Yep, that one there.
That's the one. Thank you, Molly.
Yeah, it's interesting because I certainly fell into this category when I moved here, and I think a lot of people do who moved recently, that you come because it's more affordable than the place you're coming from. But to your point to the slide earlier, with the more money you make, the more discretionary money you have. So I might have wanted to pay whatever for a house, but once you come invested in the community in some way, you are able to pay more than that, and you're able to essentially bid up a place. If you're like, oh no, and it might be less of an impact to you in your lifestyle. So that's kind of unintentionally how these things end up becoming more expensive. At least one factor in that. So
That's right.
So while we were talking, I just quickly looked up our our requirements for below market rate units, and for construction of 10 units or more, we require 10% of the units be for rentals 70% of area median income, and which comes out to $58,000 or $57,000. So we're a little off the mark on the county's goals. So maybe this is something that we can look at for an adjustment we want to make. Because we have no current requirement of any new development to create units that fall within the county's definition or goal.
Right, and that might be one of the things that the county says, if you want to qualify for funds, you got to do certain things, right?
Yeah,
and we
let's do
should
it.
encourage it. That program, that makes sense. That I didn't remember the exact percentage, but I think it was trying to get at workforce housing, right?
Yeah, I remember that.
And some of our priorities were for city workers, school district workers, and it was sort of in that higher range, still trying to get some sort of affordability, but in that next group up, right? That makes sense.
Okay.
And we should look at.
yeah, I also would
different-
assume AMI is probably increased significantly, as more people can work remotely and therefore able to take jobs maybe were once based in the city and other higher income areas. So that might also be an impact on why it's higher.
I actually calculated it off the 2019
Okay, so it's
annual
probably
income
even
in the
higher
PowerPoint.
now.
So
Yeah.
it's 81. Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah.
And that you use an accounting number?
The one that's in the
Yeah.
slide here.
So one of the things we could do is, if we could agree in a workshop or something to take that on, to articulate it, and to submit it to the county and say, Beacon wants to take the lead on this challenge, and here's what we're willing to do. We want to adjust this requirement, and we'd love to see other areas do like us. Then that would kind of be, getting at what the mayor, was suggesting as the Greenway Pact is, taking that step.
Yeah, I really don't want $20 million of county money to go to sewers and water and get no housing out of it because they're trying to develop capacity. Well, I understand, right? In the towns, if you want to do something, you're going to have to do that work. But I think we're further along, so. Okay. Yeah, and I don't think we've got to solve any of our problems today. I think we're just presenting it and just talking through things. One of the things maybe we should ask our planner is to look at these recommendations, look at the recommendations that were made about a year ago to the council, and kind of look at our laws and say, where are areas we might true up things, right?
Yeah, that's a great idea. I wanted to cross-reference everything with our comprehensive plan and different things that the city planner has put out there, and just kind of see where it all lines up. But I think it's really the overall picture that is so important to grasp, and even the overall picture that I gave doesn't give all of the big important takeaways from the report. I mean, households earning less than $100,000 are going to struggle to find a home to buy in Dutchess County. So that's really important, but it isn't, and it is something that we could address, in different ways, but it isn't necessarily what this report, what this group recommended we focus on, because it isn't the highest need. So, thank you.
Ready?
Thank you, Ren.
Yep.
you.
Thanks, Ren.
Thank you, Ren.
Thanks for all the hard work you put into this.
Yeah, I appreciate you joining the committee. It was about a year ago, 8 months ago.
It was September, I think. It was a joy, and
Yeah.
it really was so interesting to see that despite the difference in the jurisdictions, there were a lot of shared barriers to affordable housing across the county.
Cool. Okay. So that's our community segment. We will come back to it. We'll obviously put this on an agenda item to kind of move forward with. And next up is public comment. And, this is the first opportunity for public comment. I think most of you here know the routine, which is you get up to 3 minutes on any topic you like, except if there's a topic for a public hearing. There is one for public hearing, which is on ward boundaries. So if you want to talk on that, wait till the public hearing. But otherwise, you may talk on any topic you like. There's a sign up here. We'll go through that list first. And first one's Robert Simmons. Hey.
Good evening. What I'll bring up. I read a couple articles from the Free Press and an article from the Current about the Firehouse consolidation, and which I'm all for. It's the smartest move the city made in a long time. So, but I do have some points to bring up that were not mentioned. Not mentioned were the volunteers, active and exempt. No mention of the Lewis Tompkins Hose members being evicted from their building. No mention who will be responsible for packing and storing 136 years of our memorabilia while under construction. We did sit down with Chris Wright and we had a little meeting, and he did tell us that the construction was going to start sometime in 2023. After that, I've heard nothing. Nothing from the mayor or the city council. And in my opinion, it's a total lack of respect to all the dedicated volunteers who serve this city. Also, Lewis Tompkins Hose has put funds for over 30 years into a city-owned building to keep it maintained. By doing that, we have fundraisers. And you taking us out of our building will stop our fundraising. And that will affect a lot of people in Beacon. Families in need, veterans, food pantries, and other organizations that we donate to. I could keep, there's so many notes here, I know, but as for communication about the consolidation, we have a chief, Gary Van Boris. He gives his monthly reports at our meetings, and when we inform him of our concerns, his answer is the city council doesn't tell him anything until the last minute and rarely has answers for us. So there's just too much to discuss, and I hope the mayor and administration and the city council could give us the same amount of respect that the dummy light got down on Main Street, and I know you got a lot of pressure on that one, which I was upset with that too. I do believe we earned it. And in closing, I would like the city council to come over to one of our meetings and sit down with our members, the Maze Hook and Ladder members, and we can get on the same page, because we're a total loss. And if you come over, I'm sure, I think some of you might have went over there and see what we have. There is a lot of stuff that we have to put away for this construction that you have planned for the firehouse. So, and I also say, I served 40 years for this city fire department as a volunteer, third generation, and I want to say it was an honor, because I went exempt last month, and it was an honor to serve with all the men and women in this department. Thank you very much. I hope we can get together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, could I just ask that any statements about our staff or our department head should be taken with a grain of salt? I'm sure that's not what Gary Van Voren said, and I'm not. I would like to ask speakers to refrain from putting words into department heads' mouths who aren't here to defend themselves.
Okay, I'll agree with that, but we have minutes of the meeting. If you want me to come down and read them to
I'm
you,
sorry,
I can do
I
that
didn't
too.
think this was a back and forth, Mayor.
No. Okay, I'm done. But you
And we
answered
did,
me.
we
You
did
answered
meet
me.
with you, Mr. Simmons, and you're very aware of what's going on at the firehouse.
Yeah, so let's not do a back and forth. I'd appreciate it. I do want to hear all the public comments, and I think Gary Simmons is next.
Gary Simmons, 226 Liberty Street. I'm just going to follow up with what my brother said. There really hasn't been much communication about the whole Firehouse ordeal that's going on. It's a 20-year process. We've been pushing it down the road over and over and over. At this point right now, I personally don't know what Lewis Tompkins Hose is going to do, where we're going. I haven't seen any rooms. I did see a couple little prints, like a couple of 10 by 10 rooms. I didn't see anything about a community room or big meeting room. So I just don't know how we're going to function and still do what we do as a volunteer organization. The volunteer numbers, active-wise, are way down. They're almost non-existent. But there's still volunteer firefighters that are exempt. I think there's, 250 actually on the rolls? Some are pretty old. But we're going to need some place to meet, have our rooms, store our equipment. You know, it's not, the way it seems now, it's like we're getting kicked out. And it seems to be a lot of sentiment that way, where they're not providing a service for us anymore. We don't need them. We're just going to do what we're going to do with the career side now. And I was a career guy for 23 years and volunteer for 35 or 36 now. So I see both sides, and sometimes they clashed. But we pretty much get along, and I just want to say that I think we need to be thought about in the process of how we're going to exist in this new building. And it's not just Tompkins Hose. Maze Hook and Ladder, they're closing that building. I seen something on the internet where that's slated to be closed. Where are they going with their stuff? Their numbers are way down, but there's still exempt members and, you know, members of Maze Hook and Ladder. Beacon Engine's got their own building. That's a different thing. But, you know, we do provide a service to the community with donations. We give away a lot of money every year. So if we disappear, them things disappear too. So that's all. Just wanted everybody to think about it a little bit.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Dennis Pavlak.
Dennis Pavlak, Beacon resident. There will be an informational meeting regarding the closing of Castle Point this Saturday at 10 a.m. at the Memorial Park Pavilion right across from Ron's Ice Cream. The county had one this past Saturday at the Poughkeepsie Elks Club. It was very well attended. And I'm going to go off that meeting with information that I've received from that meeting. I have the AIR report at that meeting. I just have one copy, so I'll go off that meeting but any updates. But I got Sean Patrick Maloney's Director of Veterans Affairs going to be there. Joe Payone's going to be there. And it was put out to all the politicians' offices for it to be there, and anybody else can be there as well.
Can you hear in the back? Okay.
Contractor.
Can you speak up into the mic?
Yep.
Great.
Contractors in the city. I was going past the George Washington Head a while back, and somebody was doing work on Walcott Avenue. They did not have the proper cones placed coming at them from the Loopers Plaza. They had it marked properly, but not enough cones coming at them, and the guy's telling everyone to slow down. I said, you don't have proper cones put out to let people know when you come up on you like that. It should be placed out. Where is our inspector for this, to have this checked? I see nobody with a white hat. The retired city workers we had for inspectors checking this, I didn't see anybody there making sure that was done. Volunteers in the firehouse. I'm a honorary firefighter in 2 firehouses. I would like to see this correction, this disregard corrected for the volunteers. Let's keep them here, like we made a deal with the ambulance corps. Let's give them a deal as well. And I was sorry to hear the Mount Pickett incline. I'm a former trustee, voting member from 1996 to 2000. We need to get somebody serious in here that's going to take action and go to the next step with a business plan to the state parks of New York and get this done. Get it done and stop talking about it. we had enough. Let's get this put on top of the mountain, let's get plans, conceptual plans made up, and let's get the state parks involved, and let's get this start happening. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Stash Yankowski.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Stash Yankowski. I live on one of Beacon's speedways, and as Barack Obama would say, it's time for a change, folks. Change that matters. So let's get those speed limits lowered. I agree with John Clark that Main Street should be 20 miles per hour. I think that would be great. I want to again ask you all to consider adding a clause to the good cause eviction law. I've asked before and I haven't heard any discussion, and Lee or Chris, if you could add to the agenda discussion on my proposal that's very important for landlords, for owners of property. In my lease, I have a clause that says the tenant has to give me entry into the apartment for inspection. That's
Mayor,
not...
I can't hear him. You've got to back off the mic a little bit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's not in the law. So I ask that you put in there that a tenant has to give an owner the right to enter the property for inspection. And if the tenant does not, then that's a good cause for eviction. George, you mentioned during your discussions of that law that you were looking for a fair playing field, a level playing field. The playing field is not level. It's really skewed for the renters. The renters have free free legal advice, whereas a landlord, an owner has to pay big bucks to an attorney, and it's a complicated process. So if you would add at least that clause, it's important. A tenant can have the lease automatically renewed year after year or month after month if there's no other reason for evicting the tenant. It's like giving the tenants the right to own the property almost. They're taking property away from owners, giving it to tenants. And an owner does not know what's going on in the property if they can't gain entry. We have to see if the condition is being kept in good condition. One of my tenants I found in the backyard cigarette butts. I don't know if they were smoking outside. I don't know if it was them, but things like that. If I entered the property, I can maybe at least smell some smoke and say, hey, you got to cut it out. It's in my lease. You can't smoke. So if you could just at least discuss it. And I think hopefully you will agree that that's a very important provision for all owners of property, not just myself, but all the others. Thank you.
Thank you. Donna Mickelson.
Hello, everybody. Put this down. Hi. My comment is regarding the community funding program. You workshopped it last week. I just want an opportunity to speak to you in person. This summer, on August 5th, the Howland Library will celebrate 150 years since its grand opening in 1872. And it's a big moment. It only comes once every 150 years, so once in our lifetime. And this project has been a year in the making. So I really want to thank the City Council for making sure that this is a democratic process and taking the time to read all the applications. It's much appreciated. We bring together 3 local organizations: the library, the Howland Cultural Center, and the Beacon Historical Society. We are telling stories of the library that are diverse and local with national and global perspectives. We will be celebrating some of the community's unsung heroes and telling stories that probably lots of people have never heard, including one that includes a slap, which is really a funny story. The exhibit also includes programming like artist talks, performances, lectures, and tours that are free to the public. And we even have a special surprise planned for the Spirit of Beacon Day. I can't think of a more unifying space than the public library. It serves everyone in the community. And coming out of 2 years of COVID, our community could use some coming together and some healing. Sharing stories and celebrating our achievements whilst examining the challenges we face as a community is part of that healing. And this exhibition gives us an opportunity to do that. Our students in the school, they should know some of these amazing local heroes who kept that library going for 150 years. In the 1970s, one of the librarians in Beacon, her name was Patricia Hanna, she wrote a book entitled People Make It Happen. And that's what this exhibition celebrates, the people that make it happen. So I hope the council will find a way to fund this program. It would be amazing for the city. We'd like to see banners up and down Main Street. And we'd like that if people come to our city, whether they're a tourist or they're newly coming to live here, that they see a city that supports its public institutions like the library. And they themselves will go, yeah, this is important. I'm going to support it too, and they'll become members. So when you talk about sustainability, that's where this project is sustainable for the city. So I hope that if you have any questions, you please contact us and that you would consider us for the funding, because I think it would be great for the city. I appreciate it, your time. Thank you.
Thank you. That's everyone on the list. Might there be someone out in the audience that wants to speak? Take your pick.
Thank you, Clerk. Good evening. My name is Teresa Kraft. Usually I stand here and make public comments as a concerned resident, but tonight I'd like to switch hats and speak on behalf of the Howland Cultural Center as its new president. During last week's workshop discussion on the Community Investment Program, the City Administrator said that he did not want to give the Howland Cultural Center another grant. A recent building facade grant of $50,000 has yet to be used, and that grant may be pulled back, a fact that we were reassured by the city would never happen. I could not help thinking that one grant had nothing to do with the other. Howland Cultural Center submitted an application for an exciting exhibit celebrating Howland's 150 with the arts community, the Howland Public Library and the Beacon Historic Society. Celebrating 150 years comes around only once in our lifetime, not even. If our upcoming exhibit and programming designed with something for everyone in our community doesn't scream community enough, we're not sure what does. To say we've done nothing is unsettling. The center has been working behind the scenes with a professional architect firm whose practice is focused on historic preservation. With a comprehensive building conditions report and complete sets of detailed architectural drawings and building specs, we went out to bid for construction to rebuild the building's front portico, phase 1 of our full building restoration project. The winning bid returned with a $125,000 price tag submitted by a construction company whose focus is also on historic preservation. On the advice of the city on April 15th, we applied for an additional $50,000 grant through NY18 Sean Patrick Maloney's office. The Howland Cultural Center building is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. We are in discussion with the National Park Service to elevate our status so that we may be eligible for more federal grant monies. In March, we closed for an entire month to restore the interior Grand Gallery room, repairing the plaster walls and painting all 3 levels all the way up to the ceiling. In addition, we installed professional picture hanging systems and signage with stories and histories of the historic Richard Morris Hunt building, the Howlands and their charitable work throughout our city, and a photo collage of some of the many events through the years. We even hung up the building's original Howland circulating library sign in the main room after leaning on top of a bookshelf for 49 years. Tonight we call upon all our friends and residents of Beacon to hear our battle cry and remind you the Jewel of Beacon needs your support and your donations. And Chris, here is
15 seconds.
Here is a book. It doesn't include our contractor's financial information, but there's a lot of pictures. Big bag.
Thank you. Clark?
Clark Evman, 2 Wilson Street. It might help for the Howland Center to improve its charity navigator rating from 45%, which means the organization doesn't really run openly and fairly. I know for one that I wanted to book a dramatic presentation for 7 straight nights, or any Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Sunday, Saturday, for at least 10 years, but that's beside the point. My focus tonight is on two topics. One's the fire department, the other is the report on affordable housing, which neither one I'll be able to touch of any meaningful way, except to say that the proposed, I got the fire department, I understand we need it, I'm not really opposed to it. I would like to see a second barn for the ambulance, because I think the MTA can be had to pay for it. I think this section of town, Lee, like your comment made, well, there's going to be regional whatever. Well, good. But let's have two right here in the heart of our city, while region builds 7 in Fishkill and whatever. So, I mean, there is some balance and investment that it should be considered, number one. Number two, the very, 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 very critical, and I have like $100 million construction management experience, okay? Please, just listen to one fact, okay? When you have your construction documents going out to bid, that is not the time to learn about them. Your contract has no provision for the delivery of a sliding production of construction documents to bring you to the window you proposed that's construction in March. You should be in November. People are hungrier in November than March, but that's beside the point. And then moving on, and I'm almost halfway done. Moving on is that the contract for the architect means if you don't finish it by March of 23 or 24, you pay him extra. He has 2 years, right? And now he can easily delay by going back and telling you that the contract comes in at the end of the year, and these are the bid documents, and you haven't had discussed anything like, well, what's less expensive, sealing the floors or putting epoxy or whatever. So you got to have choices in this. You don't just go spend the $11 million. Now, moving on, affordable housing. I don't have more time to tutor you on he needs to be improved. He's not doing the job that he needs to do on that contract. That contract should not be passed tonight. And you're going to spend the next 2 years wondering why. Okay, moving on, affordable housing. Ren, I'd like to spend some time with you. I think that the whole idea here about affordable housing is to apply it to Beacon. Now, I sent you folks a little bit of an email just a minute ago with a little picture. I was pontificating on the cost of connecting a majority of SUNY colleges in New York State to high-speed rail. And, of course, that always has a component with Beacon. You people are just totally lost on the subject of affordable housing, creating affordable housing, and it's really a shame. And you need to spend some time with me, at least listening to a more professional perspective.
Thank you. Anyone else in the public audience? I don't see anyone else in the public audience with an opportunity to speak. Do you want to check online, Ben?
Yes, Mayor. If you're on Zoom and you'd like to make a comment, please use the raise hand option at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you're on a phone, you can press *9. If you're watching on YouTube, you will have to join the Zoom by visiting beaconny.gov. Mayor, as of now, we have one hand raised, and that is Arthur Kamens.
Okay.
Hear me?
Yep.
Okay. What I have to say tonight is pretty brief and simple, and it's captured in the phrase that Donna used a few minutes ago: people make it happen. And I want to respond to two things. One is the housing survey, and I'm really pleased that we have that now, because it certainly documents and underlines the dire need for affordable housing at multiple income levels. That said, I think there are portions of it where some assumptions about what needs to be done are challengeable. I don't want to go into that tonight, but I want to say that the most important next step before we rush to proposals about what we should do is getting input from the people who will affect the most, people across the community. And that input should not happen after the proposals are raised, but before it gets raised. So we can hear from the community about what they see in their needs, what kind of community they want to live in. And then we need to get input from folks with expertise in affordable housing about what each of those kinds of proposals and solutions might mean for the community. This is something, I've been talking about now since I've been here, and so we need to get that done. And I think that same set of principles, getting input from the community in a broad, comprehensive way before we make any decisions or before any recommendations get made, also applies to what Beacon is going to do with the ARPA money that it is set to receive, about $750,000, sometime this summer. That's pretty close, and as far as I know, as far as I've heard, there has been no discussion of it in public on the city council, nor has there been any request for public input on that topic. So I want to implore all of you, before you jump ahead and talk about this or that idea, valid as they may be or challengeable as they may be, we need to hear from the public. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, you have no further Zoom speakers at this time.
Okay, that's the first opportunity for public comments. There'll be a second for those who didn't get a chance to speak. It says on the agenda that I'm supposed to notice the meeting location, even though we've been meeting for a while. So we still have a combination or a hybrid meeting style, so we allow people to dial in electronically as well as to appear in person. So I just want to notice that. I think we get to do that through June, and then we might have to do something else. Anyway, let's do public hearings. That's next. There is a single public hearing this evening, which is on slight changes to the city ward boundaries. Can I get a motion and a second to open the public hearing?
Motion?
Second.
Do we vote on that? Or do we? I'm forgetting.
You have
all in
Drew
favor?
on. Drew, do you vote to open the public hearing?
Yeah, so you did
Okay.
a motion, a second, usually it's an all in favor.
All in favor?
Aye.
I'm going to give you the gavel, Drew. Okay, thank you. And I believe, let me introduce the technical aspects, and then Drew, you can introduce the legal aspects. The technical ones, we asked the city planner to take a look at the census data. So census data comes in what are called blocks, and he arrayed them as we did 10 years ago and took a look at what the ward populations were. There were actually only slight differences from 10 years ago. When you do this every 10 years, the differences are always slight. The last time, 10 years ago, we did this, we hadn't done it for 20 years, and there were more changes. This time, the city planner proposed a couple of options that were slight variations of moving Ward 1 a little bit in one direction and moving Ward 3 and 4 a little bit in another. So that's the proposal you'll see. Basically, the only changes are along Verplank from Matawan to Fishkill Avenue. Ward 1 bumps up one block to Kent Street. That's the one change. The second change, and that's from Ward 3, is the boundary of Ward 1 is Fishkill Avenue on the east, and the proposal is to bump it one block further to the east to Skank, and that's the second change. And then the third one is there's a bump out, and if we've got a map, we can show this, that Ward 4 had to come into Ward 3 10 years ago, and it's just extending that by going from along Grove Street and along East Main, one block further from Washington to DePeyster. Right, that's the third change. Those are the three changes. It affects a total of 300 and some residents in the census tracts out of 14,000. So it's a very small change. So that's sort of the technical aspect. If you could do the legal piece about that, I would appreciate it, Drew.
Absolutely. So section 5-20 of the city code sets forth the ward boundaries and requires the city council to review the results of the federal census to determine whether there are any changes necessary. Changes would be necessary just to keep the populations in in each ward relatively even. So the reason that you have a local law in front of you is because we are amending the ward boundaries, which are set forth in that section 5-20. Once the city council adopts this local law, it will be subject to a permissive referendum. What that means is that the residents in the city of Beacon have 45 days to submit a petition. If a valid petition is submitted to the city, meaning it's signed by qualified voters and there is the required amount of voters that sign it, which is 5% of the city, of the population that voted in the last governor election, then it would be subject to a vote at the next general election in November. So that's what happens. If no petition is submitted to the city of Beacon, then it becomes a law in 45 days and will change the ward boundaries that are set forth in section 5-20. At the last workshop, Molly pointed out a couple changes that needed to be made. Myself, the mayor, and John Clark each reviewed the local law to make sure that we had all the changes necessary. So we did a kind of walkthrough of those lines. The map has not changed, but there are slight edits to the law just to reflect exactly what's in that map.
And the only other thing I would add is that if we act sooner than the county, then as they draw the other districts that need to be prorated equal in size to population, which are county ledge districts, hopefully they'll follow our ward lines in choosing those, right? And we'll get rid of election district 3-3.
There's a draft I've seen. If you haven't seen it yet, I can share it with you.
Oh, I'd be interested.
Okay.
So, yeah. So anyway, that's the public hearing. Any questions, or otherwise we'll just open it up for any public comments? Okay. So if you'd like to speak on this topic, you've got time to do so now.
Clark, Mr. Mayor, how long would that be? I'm sorry.
Sorry?
Public comment period for an individual, how many minutes?
Oh,
5 minutes?
5.
Is it 5? Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, great. Well, you know, I bet the firemen who served the city so well for well over a century would be real interested in possibly changing the form of government to an elected mayor, and a elected mayor who's paid a decent salary instead of a city manager, and maybe just a council of 4. So the boundaries are an issue, guys. You know, it'll only take about 100 signatures.
Could we have some?
So this is on ward boundaries, though.
Yeah, we're on ward boundaries, and
Stay
I
there.
resent the city manager from intruding in my time.
Let me run the
Thank
meeting.
you.
But
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
You've got the time, but it
Yeah.
needs to be about ward boundaries.
We are talking about ward boundaries. We're talking about citizens' options to throw all of you out of office. And that's
So
exactly the function. That's exactly the function when you draw lines.
Well,
Okay,
if you
so-
want to comment on the changes to the ward boundaries, that would be appropriate.
I am, because the lack of information in terms of population, anticipated population given growth, for instance, Edgewater, you mentioned 324 units. Did you add 1,000 population to that prospectively and try to create a balance in between development in the regions of the city? No, because you're small-minded, okay? Now, I apologize. I'll calm down. But really, okay, you've gotten pretty much a free ride here to do whatever you darn well please. And we trusted you to move in a certain direction that made sense for this time and this age and this community. And we just spent a half hour talking about housing nonsense that did absolutely nothing to solve the problem, and pretend as though you're doing something.
Well, you had to come back to ward
I am
boundaries.
coming back because
Come back.
it's the propensity of this autopilot of listen, you have power. This is a good thing. This is America. We want you to have power. But we want you to eliminate the gamesmanship from our government. We want you to talk forthrightly and openly of what you can and can't do. We want you to engage in discussion that's meaningful to create meaningful results.
So
Not
again,
give away the city's, Lee, I am talking about the idea that a boundary in an election has consequence. And if you run short in defining your boundaries when you don't show the population of each district and show the equalization, you don't show the data, the tendency of government is to conceal data. Duh. We understand that. As well as people with power to withhold questioning your judgments. That's human nature, guys. You don't have a problem with me. You only have a problem with me when you don't try your best, when you don't get to the bottom of what needs to be done, when you don't come up with solutions, okay? And that's what happens when you draw boundaries and you don't bother telling people how many people are in each district.
It's right here in the attachment,
The
block by
attachment.
block.
How many are in Ward 1?
So I would propose that we let him speak and
Okay,
we can
because
go through.
I'm not aware whether or not Ward 1, okay, includes the 324 and some kind of economic postulation as to the imbalance of that population that's going to bring into that district. Not that it has to be finite, not that it has to be absolute, but there ought to at least be a lip service to inform the public and how these numbers change in the various boundaries. So the bottom line is, perhaps I am wrong. And okay, let's just pretend I'm wrong. Let's just assume I'm wrong. But the point is still valid. Has the future population of every district, as approved for housing, has it made it into calculations? And if it hasn't, that's fine. But what is that number? What's the projected possibility of that number? So the reality is here is that it's, what I'm talking about is I'm talking about the cadence of speech and information. And whether or not we're doing genuine sharing of government or we're telling people. Okay, just like the firemen a minute ago. Okay, they're saying you're telling us something, but you're not sharing with us the opportunity to have dignity for the time that we spend.
Seconds.
My wife tells me that I love pissing people off. The reality is, what I do love to do is I love to challenge people to think hard and make things better. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to comment on this public hearing? But it does need to be on ward boundaries.
Generally, I'm opposed, Teresa Kraft, generally I'm opposed to amending and changing ward boundaries, but I agree the changes proposed are very subtle and believe they will not create a visible shift in these neighboring wards. I agree you should amend this local law for clarity if the residents included in the 2.13% change agree.
Thank you. And then for the record, anyone else either online or in person want to say something in the public hearing on ward boundaries?
You don't have any hands up right now.
Okay. You want to do the numbers or shall I?
I do not want to do the numbers.
So, as I understand it, the census data is the data you must use, not any future information nor any past information. It's only the census data. And the wards are equalized within 5%. That's 2.5 up, 2.5 down from the mean, and that's what was achieved. And as I mentioned, the total changes involves 342 out of 14,000 individuals that involve a change. So that is under 3%, 2.5% involve a change. So those are the numbers, and again, those are what we're allowed to do. Drew, just confirm with me, we did what we were required to do by law, right?
That's correct. The state law sets forth exactly what you have. It's actually a municipal home rule law, sets forth the criteria for redistricting. And so we've evaluated those criteria with the city to assist in the redistricting of the wards or doing the ward boundaries.
Okay. Anything else in this public hearing? Can I get a motion to close the public hearing?
Motion. Second.
All right, that was Justice and Dan. Any other discussion? All in favor? Oh, sorry.
I just want to note that the Dutchess County Board of Elections will take on the notification of the ward change for those 342 people. They handle the notification of your voting location and will do so before the next election that this is relevant for.
Right, which will be 2023.
Yep.
Not before.
Yep.
Okay, all in favor of closing the public hearing?
Aye. Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay. That's the public hearing. I think the next item is reports. Where do we want to start? Which direction? This way?
Sure.
Molly?
The only thing I have to share today from Ward 1 is I'll be holding office hours on Friday, May 20th from 4 to 6 p.m. So though we have not officially voted on this and decided if we do adopt the ward boundaries, those who are going to be newly part of Ward 1 are welcome to come and meet me if they would so like to. The location is TBD, but I hope to have somewhere probably along Main Street, but I will advertise it on our website. Ben has been so great about adding those, and also share it at our next workshop, which will be before the 20th. And that's it.
All right. Hi, Justice McCrae, Ward 2. I will try to keep this brief as well. I want to thank everybody that came out for the Earth Day cleanup and has participated in Earth Day or Earth Week events over the last week. I want to thank our highway department for all the hard work that they're doing with the milling and paving of Main Street. It's going to look brand spanking new, especially with those bows that have been put up by NAMI for Mental Health Awareness Month, if you haven't seen those, all up and down Main Street. Let's see what else. If you are using public transportation, primarily the Loop bus system, there is an app that you can use to track where the buses are. Yes, you can track the live location of the Loop buses, including all of the county-wide Loop buses. It is DCTP. If you just search that in the App Store or the Google Play Store, you will find the Dutchess County Transportation app, and it is wonderful. It will tell you exactly where your bus is if it is not there on time or if it has been rerouted. So please feel free to check that out. And lastly, I am having my first ward meeting May 18th at 6:30 p.m. at 1 Forrestal Heights in their community room. All residents of Ward 2 are welcome to bring their concerns, meet their neighbors, and have a few goodies that I may bake or cook. And I will end it with that.
Good evening. I also want to thank the Highway Department and all the Public Works members who have made this project on Main Street as seamless and as less inconvenient as possible. But I'd also like to thank the public for being cooperative in this matter as well, and business owners who have been impacted negatively by the upset of traffic and so on. So, but thanks to everyone, and I'm sure maybe Chris will give us an update on the dummy light. I'm sure everyone was concerned,
I'm
but if
burning
that's,
to do that.
Yeah. If that's the worst of our problems, then we're okay. And I also wanted to bring something up that Paloma mentioned earlier, and I read it in the Highland Current about Phillipstown hiring a firm to establish a database on the compliance of Airbnb and short-term rentals. I believe that Beacon should be looking into this as well, because I think it's probably the lowest hanging fruit of available options for affordability in Beacon. And although the county may not have considered it a priority, I think in a town or city like Beacon, I think it has a more profound impact than it would in a more rural area. So I hope we can look into that. I think it's a good way, and I think the short-term rentals are undermining the sense of community that we have here when you don't have an opportunity to get to know your neighbors. So I hope we can have a longer discussion about that in the future. And that's it. Thanks.
Ditto to what George said. And I have a couple of things. I want to, first of all, thank everyone who has participated in the community quarterly so far, particularly to Chief Van Voorhees for hosting us at Tompkins Hose this past Saturday. I also, on the topic, like to note that my understanding of the plans for the new Firehouse do include a community room and allow the continuation of any community events that are relevant.
No.
Nope. Sorry, correct me.
No, I mean, why don't I approach this when we talk about the contract?
Okay, sorry about that. And I would like to specifically thank Alex, Anthony, the Beacon Queer Liberation and Human Rights Commission, Brett, Derek, Fairground, Jamie, Kara, Kathleen, Maggie, Martin, Stephen, Yvonne, for submitting ideas to our first community quarterly. We will have the video of those presentations from last Saturday up on the City of Beacon YouTube page shortly, and we'll be releasing a final ballot for Beaconites to vote on their priorities this coming weekend. I hope that as many people as possible will participate in this third and final phase of our first community quarterly. This whole thing has been a bit of an experiment, but I think it's been extremely worthwhile. So thank you to everybody who has been participating. I will also note that my monthly open office hours are, as usual, on the second Sunday of the month. That is this coming Sunday, also Mother's Day, from 4 to 6 p.m. I'll be at Pole Hill Park, and I'll note that one of my favorite aspects of these open office hours is when visitors overlap. It's about me listening to you, but also you listening to each other, and I've really appreciated all of the overlapping conversations that have happened in my office hours. I also want to have a short note to Stasha's comment that landlords gaining entry for regular maintenance of the building is already allowed in the good cause eviction law. It is not a grounds for eviction, as I think it should be, but it is allowed within the law. I also want to note that I am interested in hearing public input on how our ARPA money is being spent. I think that our current plan for how it's spent is sound, but I would still like to hear public input on that. Finally, this week holds a National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirited People. Given that in a 2018 report from the Urban Indian Health Institute, they have identified murder as the third leading cause of death among American Indian and Alaska Native women and girls aged 10 to 24. A 2016 study by the National Institute of Justice demonstrated that more than 4 in 5 American Indian and Alaska Native women have experienced violence in their lifetime. And on some reservations, American Indian and Alaska Native women face murder rates that are more than 10 times the national average. On May 4th, 2021, President Biden issued a proclamation designating May 5th as Missing and Murdered Indigenous Persons Awareness Day. The proclamation called on all Americans and levels of government to support tribal governments and tribal communities' efforts to increase awareness of the issue of missing and murdered American Indians and Alaska Natives. I would like to note in this that while none of us alive today bear personal responsibility for the actions of our ancestors, I believe we have a greater duty to respect the lives of those whose ancestors stewarded this land that we live on today for thousands of years. The crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous peoples deserve the National Day of Awareness that they have. Along with sharing this information, I would like to acknowledge that the City of Beacon sits on the ancestral lands of the Mahikaniak people of the waters that are never still, whose living descendants now reside on a federal reservation in Wisconsin and are known as the Stockbridge-Munsee Band of Mohicans. Thank you.
Thank you, Paloma. Thanks to the Tree Committee for an inspiring planting ceremony. Chris was there. It was inspiring. Good stories, good music, and a hopefully good and well-watered tree. Thanks also to the Greenway Trail Committee for leading a couple dozen Beaconites on Earth Day up from Roundhouse Park to Groveville Bridge and telling us the story of the land as we cleaned it up. And echoing Paloma's thanks to everyone who came out to the community quarterly on Saturday. It was impressive. I was especially impressed by the ideas discussed, and it reinforces what I've said over and over, that the spirit of Beacon is volunteerism, simply put. And it's a perfect thing to consider that spirit of Beacon today, especially Eid Mubarak. Also, mark your calendars. The Foundation for Beacon Schools will hold its Student Film Festival at 6:30 on May 14th. Tickets are $8 for adults and $4 for students, and it's going to be amazing. And their gala is set for June 11th from 7 to 11 at the settlement camp. And they're going to come together around stories about how the Beacon City School District helped families during the pandemic. They're raising funds for innovative projects that enhance student learning. Foundation for Beacon Schools. Thank you.
All right. So first off, I just want to say congratulations to the cast and crew, the Beacon Players cast and crew for their production of Into the Woods, as well as the adults, parents, and teachers who were behind them. It was a fantastic performance, really professional work. This was like at least a college grade level production. So congratulations to everybody. It was wonderful. Secondly, I just want to also just say that I really appreciated the format of the Community Quarterly, and I just want to thank my colleagues for putting so much thought and work into setting it up. It was really a 180 of a council meeting in that the public comes forward and shares their ideas, and the council sits and listens to new ideas that are publicly generated. And I just really say that having a different space for that format is so valuable, and I really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to more. One constituent wrote to me afterwards and said it was a great start, so it was really great to see. Also, my office hours, which is basically just having coffee with me. We don't have to call it office hours, but May 15th from 11 to 1 at Trax Coffee House at 1 East Main, hopefully out on the porch. And then lastly, this is new news. I just heard from the farmers market that we will be hosting a pollinator plant and seed exchange at the May 22nd farmers market. That's Sunday. We'll have a booth. We're giving away, we're hoping that we'll get from the public as they're pulling their plants apart and digging things up, that they'll give us some native plants. We'll also have a lot of wildflower seed that's specific to the region, and to the zone in the region. And there will be experienced gardeners there to talk to you about how to set up your wildflower garden and what to do. So that's May 22nd at the farmers market. And more on that soon. Thanks.
Thank you all. I'll be brief. I got a proclamation. Let me read that first. So I have a proclamation declaring May as Mental Health Awareness Month, whereas mental health is essential to the well-being and the vitality of our families, businesses, and communities, and whereas mental health conditions are real and prevalent in our nation, with 1 out of 5 Americans and 1 out of 5 children affected by mental illness, and whereas more people die from suicide in the United States than from traffic accidents, and an estimated 22 veterans die from suicide each day, and whereas stigma and fear of discrimination keep many who would benefit from mental health services from seeking help, and whereas the effective treatment for those individuals with mental health conditions can recover and lead full productive lives, and whereas education, compassion, and awareness about mental illness can change negative attitudes and behaviors toward people with mental illness, and whereas each business, school, government agency, law enforcement agency, healthcare provider, organization, and citizen share the responsibility to promote mental wellness and to support prevention efforts. Now, therefore, the City of Beacon just proclaimed the month of May 2022 as Mental Health Awareness Month. As mayor, I also call upon all City of Beacon citizens, government agencies, public and private institutions, businesses, and schools to recommit our community to increasing awareness and understanding of mental illness, reducing stigma and discrimination, and to promoting appropriate, accessible services for all individuals, signed this evening by me. Thank you. The only other one, I was away visiting family for the first time in 2 years. I come back and half of Main Street's done, so that's exciting. So the milling and paving is done. And I know Chris will probably tell you a little bit more. I'm sorry, the milling is done and the paving has started.
How do you like it?
Boy, if you thought the dummy light thing was a controversy, just let that stand.
I know. And I will add a small bit of history. Every dummy light, as far as I understand from the Historical Society, has been knocked over at least once. I believe this will be the first one that will be put back up. So, all right. And did you have some other things to say, City Administrator?
Yes.
Okay.
So we quietly added a community calendar button to our website so that we could have all of the office hours from the council and other city-sponsored events up. So if you go to our webpage, one of the top 5 bullets is a community calendar, and as you add your office hours, please just make sure Ben has the updated times and locations, and we'll get those on. I do want to thank our highway department, our water department, and our police for a great process last week milling Main Street. It was great to see those 3 departments working together, the police making sure that the streets were clear in the beginning, and then water and highway dealing with a lot of the handwork that needed to be done around our manholes and other structures. The dummy light was damaged accidentally during the milling. We are looking for replacement parts and have every intention of putting that back and maybe even giving a new coat of paint on the base to make it look a little more loved. Even though we saw it's very loved. We are beginning hydrant flushing. We do an annual hydrant flushing so that we can get sediment out of our water system and any of the low-lying areas that might have water that stayed there too long. Every spring we flush those. So over the next 4 weeks, we'll be doing hydrants throughout the city. We'll be posting a schedule on our website, and if you do have discolored water during that period of time, just let your water run for a little while, and that should clear it out. In terms of the firehouse, I think I'll wait till we get to the contract to talk a little bit more about that. In terms of the ARPA money, we are only getting $1.42 million, which is a fraction of what larger cities like Poughkeepsie and Newburgh got, which got more like $20 million. And so after talking to the mayor and our finance director, we have put that money towards the primary settling tank project at the wastewater treatment plant. Firstly, because it's a broad-based benefit. Everybody benefits in the city from us having a working wastewater system. And secondly, doing hard infrastructure just makes it beyond reproach when we do the reporting and compliance. So I'm not backfilling money that we thought we might make. We're putting it into hard infrastructure. Thank you.
Okay. We've got a couple of items on local laws and resolutions. Let's take care of them. So the first one is giving the city administrator the authority to execute an agreement with eMaintenance Enterprises for computerized maintenance management systems. Can I get a motion and a second on that?
Motion.
Second.
Molly and Dan. And Chris, will you tell us what computerized maintenance management system services are?
Yes, so this is to set up software specifically designed for our wastewater treatment plant so that routine preventative maintenance can be done on a more regular basis, tracked better, and then reported out for any of the compliance that we have to do with EPA or the New York State DEC. So one of the things we put in last year's budget was this system along with a portal for our haulers to use. So we're trying to take our wastewater treatment plant and bring it into the digital age so that we can better track these things, do a better job of making sure parts are replaced in a timely manner and that work orders are tracked.
Okay, any discussion? Hearing none, let's go to a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay. So this is resolution number 68. It's such a pleasure to have our resolutions numbered. This one is authorizing the city administrator to execute an agreement with Mitchell Associates Architects for the architectural design services for the central station at Tompkins Firehouse. Can I get a motion and a second?
Motion.
So that's George and Dan. And Chris, you want to tell us a little bit more?
So the scope of work in this contract is just for the first phase of design development. This is basically taking the conceptual plan that Bob Mitchell, the architect who's been working on the project for some years and who presented to you, he'll take that concept plan that he presented and advance it to a point at which we can then make construction documents, which will be the next phase. And then we would go to bid, hopefully in the late fall next year, so that we're ready to go and can begin construction in early spring. I just want to note that we have tried to communicate with the fire department. I went to a volunteer meeting early on when I came on with the city. The chief goes to these monthly meetings and tries to give updates. We did meet with the architect and the chief and assistant chief and other volunteers that we asked who should be at this meeting. So I don't know if some of our speakers were at that meeting, but their representatives were there, and we were very clear, there is no banquet room in this new building. We do have a space that is a conference room where people can do trainings and meetings, but it's not what they're looking for. Essentially what they want is a banquet room where they can do events, and we certainly have other options. We've suggested that we could work with the memorial building and make the bingo space or the Veterans Hall, as I'm trying to call it, available for those kinds of fundraisers. And I would just say this is the outtake of almost 20 years of consolidation studies. We think at this point the current facility is not meeting current standards for safety, for the health of our paid staff and our volunteer staff. And as you saw in the presentation, it really is a generational update to what we have. The volunteers have been an important factor for many years, and they've kept us going for decades. But the reality is that the last volunteers coming in didn't even have a volunteer company that would take them. So we now have we don't have the Tompkins Hose Company for new volunteers, we have the Beacon Fire Department for volunteers. So while I thank and respect the volunteers for the commitment they made, we also, the precedent of this has to be, the priority has to be the safety and the health of the staff that are working in there every day and making sure that they can serve the public in an effective manner. And again, I think we've been open and honest about the fact that we don't have room for storing trophies from 100 years, and that choices would have to be made about moving those elsewhere. So again, I've stated that repeatedly. I've told them that they had about a year to figure out where they're moving stuff. We've asked the department to do an inventory of what's over there. So we'll continue to try to make the transition as seamless as possible. But again, I think if we're looking to have a fire service that meets modern needs, the firehouse that Bob is working on is the direction you go. And again, we don't have the space for a banquet room for an event 5 or 6 times a year. But we have other spaces in the city that could be used for that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a couple of things. When I first came to Beacon and watched city council meetings, they were over in the banquet room at Tompkins Hose, and I spent a lot of time over there, and it's always been a pleasure. The hard part for us is making choices and with taxpayer funds. And I was willing to go to a larger footprint structure, which increased the price up above $10 million, because it served all the purposes that were essential for what we wanted to do. To have another kind of large community space really would have made the project kind of beyond what I think is affordable with taxpayer funds. We have a lot of space still in Beacon that are public buildings, and as Chris mentioned, the Memorial Building is one where we want to see increased use. I attended a banquet there actually last month. It was a fundraiser comedy night dinner. It was actually very well attended and also fit the space pretty well. It's not, I admit it's not as big as the Tompkins Hose space, but we have to kind of figure out how to effectively use our space, especially if we want to invest in our future. So I will note as well that the Beacon Engine Building, 2/3 of that is owned by the Beacon Volunteer Company and the 1/3 by the city. Obviously, at some point, we need to figure out how that works, but I think there's some opportunity there as well to kind of effectively figure out how to honor and preserve our volunteer history. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, for explaining the distinctions between the spaces. That all makes sense to me. I'm curious in terms of honoring the memorabilia if the Beacon Historical Society has been brought in to potentially house or take in some of that memorabilia.
We're at a really early stage. I've just been asking the chief to work with the company to put together an inventory so we know what's over there. There is some room to incorporate those into the new building. But again, there's a lot of stuff that I don't even know what's over there. So our first task is to figure out what's there, and then what's appropriate to keep in the building as display and a historical exhibit, and then what might go to Beacon Historical Society. And again, there's a possibility that some of it could go to Beacon Engine at some point if we work out some kind of arrangement where our part of the building is given back to the company in exchange for them opening it up to the other two companies. So again, I think there's a lot of options, and we're really early on. Like it's more than a year before we break ground on anything.
Can you actually talk, Chris, about the timeline? You said next, in terms of what we're being asked to approve today and when we expect these documents to be done versus the construction phase, which I think is not part of this, like the construction document phase, which is not part of this contract?
Yeah, so it probably will be 3 to 4 months for the design to be fully fleshed out. And the architect knows that he has to come back to the council on things like the exterior, some of the environmental stuff that we discussed, and just confirm, like, you're ready to move forward before we go to preparing bid documents. Let's make sure we know that the layout's good, the exterior's good, the parking area suffices. We'll have more information on what heating system we'll be using, and that will help us understand eventual costs, which differ depending on what you put in. So I'm hoping by early to midsummer we have something to come back with you, and then in the late summer and fall to go through bidding and get it out to bid probably towards the end of the year, maybe January at the latest. And again, that assumes that you want to move forward on it, and again, I've never said this is a done deal. You all make that decision.
We want to work on it for another 20 years.
Well, some things need to ripen, Dan. So.
Well, I do. I mean, I do appreciate that there is at least a small and maybe not small level of risk that no one is saying that it will definitely only be $11 million when it comes to build it, construction costs being what they are. And so that is a factor to take into consideration. I know we're not discussing the full thing right now. We are discussing the plans towards the full thing. But I feel okay with that because there are various points along the way where we kind of would be informed of that, and therefore the public would, and therefore we can make decisions about if costs do rise, that is it still something we're feeling good enough about to move forward with. So I feel like there's enough checks and balances while knowing that is a real possibility.
And we'll also see which direction things are headed. I mean, right now you're seeing some information suggestion we're moving into a recession, which could help to mitigate some of the increasing costs.
Other comments, questions? Okay, so this one is the authorizing the administrator on the Mitchell Associates piece, which is the design services prior to construction documents?
Yeah, everything up until the preparation of construction documents.
Okay.
So we're going to, and this also will include geotechnical borings to find out what we have underground there, so we can plan.
All right. Everyone ready?
Mm-hmm.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, thank you. Approval of minutes. I need a motion and a second to approve the minutes of April 18th.
Motion.
Second.
So that was Ren and Justice. Any changes, additions, comments?
The minutes did not include who was in attendance, and I didn't know if we needed to include that. The previous version did, but this was missing that page that sometimes at the beginning of the minutes. It was a question. I actually didn't know if we legally needed to have them there. Who was in attendance?
I heard the word legal.
I did. I know. Drew?
Sorry, I couldn't find my unmute button. It's not a legal requirement. The only legal requirement for your minutes is that if you take any action, the vote of each board member is reflected in the minutes. As far as noting who is there in the beginning, not necessary. It's not a problem that we do it. If the city council would like to include it, we can absolutely make that edit. But as far as a legal requirement under the open meetings law, it is not.
Okay.
Feels like it only matters if anyone's absent, and no one was absent, and it notes that given the votes on the motions, there were 7 of us.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to ask the question as I happened to note that it wasn't there. So.
Okay. All in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? All right, second opportunity for public comment. So if you had not had a prior opportunity to speak, you may certainly do so now, and by all means.
Fred McVicker, 224 Liberty Street. On the design of Lewis Tompkins, have they taken in consideration the voting location there? That lower hall is used for voting. Have they taken that into consideration?
So I would say I'm certainly aware of that, but yeah, we'll have to figure out something out.
Location designed for it?
It could be done, we were told, in the bays. That's a possibility, but the alternative would be we'd have to find another option.
Should that be incorporated in the original plan?
So we shouldn't have a back and forth, but you should have your comments.
You know what
Yeah.
And as far as the last comment, I wear multiple hats. I'm also a vet, and I've heard nothing about moving down to the memorial building. So if that's new, I'd like to be privy on that. Chris, you aware of that?
Are we getting in a back and forth?
No, I would
No,
suggest.
you can answer it then.
Yeah. I would just suggest, bring out your comments, and we'd certainly want to hear them, so.
I'm just putting it on the floor that
Yeah.
we were never notified.
Mayor, if I could, there's nothing to notify anyone about. This has been a conversation you and I have had with some of the members of the veterans community over at Memorial Building as late as last week about activating that building for more general community uses. So again, we're a year away from doing anything at the Firehouse. These are early conversations, and it is a publicly owned building, and the folks that run it have been very open to having the scouts there, other community groups. I mean, they've really done a good job of activating that space, but there's no reason that we couldn't, if somebody needs a banquet, we have a banquet space. We don't need to design a firehouse around a banquet hall. We already did this.
Actually, I would pass on that because you spoke at the first one. Can I suggest that we do that offline immediately upon adjournment, which will be about 1 minute? So, yeah. Fine. And then the only thing I would add is I have always thought that we had underutilized spaces in the city, and the Memorial Building, as far as I can tell, the best way to honor our veterans is to have the building used. And I know that the leadership there agrees with that sentiment, and we're just trying to kind of get that building used every single day if possible. So I just want to encourage that. That's all I got. Is there anyone else who wishes to make a public comment that has not done so? I don't think we've got anyone online, do we, Ben?
No, Mayor, there is no further hands raised online.
All right, so I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Second?
So that was Justice and Dan, all in favor? Thank you all. Good night.
Record.